You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't cut you out of my life completely." The words hung in the air of that sterile hospital room, and I watched my eldest son Michael shift uncomfortably in his expensive suit. His Rolex caught the fluorescent light as he checked the time, probably calculating how much this conversation was costing him in billable hours. You know, there's something profound about karma. How it waits patiently in the shadows, watching everything unfold, keeping perfect score. How it lets people reveal exactly who they are when they think nobody's watching, when they think there are no consequences. I've learned that the universe has a way of balancing the scales, even when it takes decades to happen. Hey there, everyone. I hope you're having a beautiful day, wherever you're watching from. Maybe you're curled up at home with some coffee, or taking a break from work, or just trying to unwind after a long day. Whatever brought you here, I'm grateful you're listening. This story, my story, it's one that changed everything I thought I knew about family, about worth, about justice. My name is Margaret Bronston, and this is the story of how I went from being a forgotten, abandoned mother living on food stamps in a cockroach-infested apartment to discovering I was worth more money than my children could spend in 10 lifetimes. This is about the moment I stood in a courtroom and watched my own flesh and blood realize they had thrown away the most valuable thing they'd ever had, not my money, but my love. But before we get to that incredible moment of reckoning, before I tell you about the phone call that changed everything, I need you to understand something. I need you to see how a woman can disappear so completely from her children's lives that they forget she's even human. Because that's exactly what happened to me. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me share these experiences with more people who might need to hear them. And definitely stick around until the end, because what happens when my children find out the truth, well, let's just say their reactions were captured on video, and it's something you won't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. Back when I still believed that love was enough, back when I thought being a good mother meant sacrificing everything for your children's happiness. I was 24 when David died. 24 years old with 3 kids under the age of 8, standing in a cemetery in my only black dress, watching them lower my husband into the ground. Michael was 7, Sarah was 5, and little Tommy had just turned 3. They didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, why Mommy cried every night after tucking them in. David had been everything to me, my high school sweetheart, my best friend, the man who made me laugh even when we were eating ramen noodles for the 4th night in a row because we were saving every penny for the kids' future. He worked construction during the day and took night classes for his business degree. We had plans, dreams of building something together. Then a drunk driver ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon, and all those dreams died with him. I remember sitting in that lawyer's office 3 days after the funeral, holding Tommy on my lap while the other 2 colored quietly in the corner. The lawyer, some tired-looking man with coffee stains on his tie, shuffled through papers and explained David's will in terms I barely understood. Something about assets being held in trust, about paperwork that needed to be filed, about waiting periods and legal procedures. The important thing, he said, barely looking up from his documents, is that you focus on taking care of those children. The estate matters will sort themselves out in time. I trusted him. God help me, I trusted everyone back then. I believed that good people did the right thing, that systems worked the way they were supposed to, that if you just kept your head down and worked hard, everything would be okay. So I did exactly what he said. I focused on my children. I took a job at the local diner, working double shifts to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. When that wasn't enough, I cleaned offices at night after the kids went to bed. When that still wasn't enough, I took in sewing work, staying up until 3 in the morning hemming dresses and mending tears by lamplight. I believed in something beautiful back then, that love could conquer anything, that sacrifice was noble, that my children would grow up understanding the value of hard work and family loyalty. I believed that someday, when they were older and successful, they'd look back and appreciate everything I'd given up for them. I believed that being poor didn't make you less worthy of love. Michael was always the ambitious one, even as a child. While other kids played video games, he read business magazines I brought home from the diner. He'd sit at our kitchen table, surrounded by my sewing projects, and tell me about his plans to become rich and successful. "I'm going to buy you a big house someday, Mom," he'd say, and my heart would swell with pride. Sarah was my dreamer, always drawing pictures of beautiful dresses and fancy parties. She'd use my fabric scraps to make clothes for her dolls, creating elaborate stories about princesses and ballrooms. "When I'm famous," she'd whisper as I tucked her in, "I'll take you to all the fancy places." And Tommy, sweet, gentle Tommy, he was my helper. Even as a little boy, he'd try to carry groceries that were too heavy for him, insisting he was the man of the house now. He'd save his allowance money in a jar, telling me it was for when we need something important. For years, we were a team. We were poor, yes, but we were together. We celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes and Christmas mornings with gifts I'd sewn or saved for months to buy. We had movie nights on our old couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn and laughing at comedies that helped us forget our troubles. I worked myself to the bone to send them to good schools, to buy them the clothes and supplies they needed to fit in with their classmates. When Michael needed a calculator for advanced math, I worked extra shifts for 2 weeks. When Sarah wanted to take dance lessons, I gave up my one luxury, my monthly coffee date with my friend Linda, to pay for them. When Tommy needed glasses, I sold my wedding ring. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once they were grown and established, things would get easier. I told myself that the love I was pouring into them would come back to me tenfold. I had no idea that with every sacrifice I made, with every time I chose their needs over my own dignity, I was teaching them that I had no value, that I was disposable. That love was something they deserved to receive, not something they needed to give back. The first crack in my beautiful delusion came when Michael graduated from college. I'd worked 3 jobs to help pay for his education, and I was so proud when he landed that entry-level position at the investment firm. I remember calling him to congratulate him, and the way his voice changed when his coworkers walked by. "Mom, I'm kind of busy right now," he said, and I could hear the embarrassment in his tone. "Can we talk later?" Later never came. The calls became shorter, less frequent. When I asked about visiting him in his new apartment, there was always an excuse. He was traveling for work, or renovating, or his roommate was having issues. But I made excuses for him. He was young, building his career, finding his place in the world. I told myself it was natural for children to need space as they became adults. Then Sarah graduated with her marketing degree and moved to the city. Suddenly, my artistic dreamer was posting photos on social media of expensive restaurants and designer handbags. When I commented on her pictures, telling her how proud I was, she'd delete my comments within hours. "Mom, my colleagues follow me on here," she explained during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "It's just professional image stuff. You understand, right?" I didn't understand, but I pretended I did. I told myself she was just being practical, that success required certain appearances. I was proud of her for being smart about her career. Tommy was the last to graduate, and for a while, I thought he might be different. He still called regularly, still visited occasionally. But even he began to change as his tech startup took off. The visits became shorter, the conversations more strained. "You know, Mom," he said during what would be our last real conversation, "you might want to think about updating your look a little. Maybe getting some nicer clothes, fixing up the apartment. It's just, when people see how you live, it reflects on all of us." That's when I realized the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. My children weren't embarrassed by their circumstances anymore, they were embarrassed by me. But the real devastation was still coming. The moment that would strip away every last illusion I had about the people I'd raised, the moment that would leave me more alone than I'd ever imagined possible. It started with a pain in my chest that wouldn't go away. The pain started as a dull ache that I ignored for weeks. When you've spent 30 years working multiple jobs, you learn to push through discomfort. Your back hurts from cleaning offices all night? Take some aspirin and keep going. Your feet are swollen from standing at the diner for 12 hours? Soak them in Epsom salt and get ready for tomorrow's shift. But this pain was different. It wrapped around my chest like a vice, making it hard to breathe during my morning cleaning rounds at the office building downtown. I'd have to stop and lean against the wall, waiting for it to pass, telling myself it was just stress. The morning I collapsed in the lobby of Henderson and Associates was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always the hardest. I had to strip and wax all the floors on the 3rd level, and my supervisor, Mr. Peterson, was particularly demanding about the conference room needing to be spotless for their weekly meetings. I was pushing my cart toward the elevator when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The next thing I knew, I was on the cold marble floor, staring up at the concerned face of a security guard named James who'd always been kind to me. "Mrs. Bronston, stay still," he was saying into his radio. "We need an ambulance at 1247 Commerce Street." The emergency room doctor was a young woman with tired eyes who spoke to me like I was a person, not just another charity case. Dr. Rodriguez explained that I'd had what they called a cardiac event, not quite a heart attack, but a serious warning that my heart was struggling. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high," she said, showing me numbers on a chart that meant nothing to me. "And your stress levels are through the roof." When was the last time you had a full physical exam? I couldn't remember. Maybe 10 years ago? 15? Doctor visits cost money I didn't have, and I'd always been too busy taking care of everyone else to worry about myself. "Mrs. Bronston, I need to be direct with you," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "Your body is telling you to slow down. If you keep pushing yourself at this pace, the next cardiac event could be fatal. You need to reduce your stress, get proper rest, and follow up with a cardiologist." The cardiologist visit 2 weeks later confirmed what I already knew but didn't want to face. Dr. Williams, a soft-spoken man in his 60s, explained that years of overwork and stress had damaged my heart. I needed medication, regular monitoring, and most importantly, I needed to stop working such physically demanding jobs. "Do you have family who can help support you during this transition?" he asked, making notes in my file. I nodded confidently. "I have 3 children. They're all very successful." He smiled. "That's wonderful. Family support makes all the difference in recovery." I called Michael first. He was 34 now, a vice president at his investment firm, living in a penthouse apartment I'd never seen. His assistant answered the phone. "Mr. Bronston is in meetings all day," she said in that polished voice that made me feel small. "Can I take a message?" "This is his mother. It's about a medical situation." There was a pause. "Hold, please." When Michael finally came on the line, his voice was clipped, professional. "Mom, what's going on?" "I only have a few minutes." I explained about the heart problems, about the doctor's orders to reduce my work hours, about needing some help while I figured out how to manage on reduced income. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mom," he finally said, and I could hear him typing in the background, "you know I'd love to help, but I'm leveraged pretty heavily right now. The penthouse, the car payments, my investment portfolio. I can't really take on additional expenses." "I'm not asking for much," I said quickly. "Maybe just help with the medication costs or—" "Look, I'll see what I can do, okay? But you need to understand, I have my own life now. My own responsibilities. Maybe it's time you looked into some government programs or something. Government programs. Like I was a stranger asking for charity, not the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for his college education. Sarah's response was even worse. When I finally reached her after 3 days of unreturned calls, she was at some networking event. I could hear laughter and clinking glasses in the background. "Mom, this really isn't a good time," she said. "I'm trying to land a major client here. Sarah, I'm having heart problems. The doctor says I need to cut back on work, and I was hoping." "Heart problems? Are you sure you're not just being dramatic? You've always been kind of anxious about health stuff." The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. Dramatic? I'd never complained about anything, never asked for help, never even mentioned when I was sick or hurt. "The doctor says it's serious," I insisted. I collapsed at work. "I'm on medication now, and—" "Okay, well, maybe you should look into getting on disability or something. There are programs for people in your situation. I really can't talk right now, but we'll catch up soon, okay?" She hung up before I could respond. Tommy was my last hope. Sweet Tommy, who used to save his allowance money for family emergencies, who'd always been the most thoughtful of my children. Surely he would understand. His startup had just gone public, and according to the business articles I'd found online, he was now worth several $1 million. When I called his office, his assistant was polite but firm. "Mr. Bronston is in back-to-back meetings with investors this week. Can I schedule you for a call next month? This is his mother, and it's urgent." Another pause. "Let me see what I can do." When Tommy finally called me back 3 days later, his voice sounded strained. "Mom, I heard you called the office. You can't really do that anymore. It looks unprofessional when family members call during business hours." "Tommy, I'm sorry, but I didn't know how else to reach you. I've been trying your personal number for days." "Yeah, I've been crazy busy." "What's going on?" I explained everything again. The heart problems, the doctor's orders, the financial strain of reduced work hours. I told him about my conversations with Michael and Sarah, about feeling lost and scared for the first time since his father died. "Mom," he said, and I could hear him sighing. "I get that this is hard for you, but you have to understand something. We've all worked really hard to build our lives, our reputations. We can't just— I mean, it's not that simple." "I'm not asking you to support me forever," I said, hating how desperate I sounded. "Just some help while I figure out how to manage on less income. Maybe help with the heart medication, or—" "The thing is, Mom, people in my position, they're judged by their associations. My investors, my business partners, they expect a certain level of sophistication. And when they see that my family situation is complicated, it raises questions about my judgment." Complicated. That's what I'd become to my own son. A complication. "What are you saying, Tommy?" "I'm saying maybe it's time you learn to be more independent. You've been relying on us emotionally for years, and it's not healthy. For any of us. Relying on them? I'd asked for nothing from them since they'd become adults. I'd celebrated their successes from a distance, sent birthday cards they never acknowledged, called just to hear their voices even when they clearly didn't want to talk. I raised you," I whispered. "I gave up everything for you. And we appreciate that, Mom, we really do. But that was your choice. We didn't ask you to sacrifice your own life for us. And now you can't expect us to sacrifice ours for you." The line went quiet except for the sound of my heart breaking. "Tommy, I'm scared. The doctor says if I don't take care of myself, I could die. I don't know how to pay for the medication on my reduced income. I don't know how to." "Mom, you're being dramatic again. People figure this stuff out all the time. There are social services, community programs. You just need to be more resourceful." Resourceful. Like I hadn't been resourceful every day for 30 years, stretching every dollar, making something from nothing, finding ways to give them everything they needed. "So that's it? I asked. You're all just going to abandon me? We're not abandoning you, Mom. We're just setting healthy boundaries. You'll figure it out. You always do. After he hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and looked around at the life I'd built. The second-hand furniture I'd carefully maintained, the photos of my children's graduations and achievements covering every surface, the sewing machine in the corner where I still took in alterations to make ends meet. For the first time since David died, I felt truly alone. But I had no idea that this was just the beginning. That my children's cruelty would escalate in ways I never could have imagined. That they were about to show me exactly how little I meant to them, and how far they were willing to go to erase me from their successful lives. The real betrayal was still coming, and it would happen on the day I needed them most. 3 months after my heart diagnosis, I was managing. Barely, but managing. I'd found a part-time job at a local library that was easier on my body than cleaning offices, though it paid significantly less. The medication kept my heart stable, but the copays were eating through what little savings I had left. I'd moved to a smaller apartment in a rougher part of town, a one-bedroom place with thin walls and a persistent leak in the bathroom ceiling. But it was what I could afford on my reduced income, and I told myself it was temporary. Just until I figured out a better solution. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was shelving returns in the library's fiction section when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Is this Margaret Bronston? The voice was professional, female. Yes, this is Margaret. Mrs. Bronston, this is Linda Miller from Riverside General Hospital. I'm calling about your emergency contact information. We have you listed as the primary contact for David Bronston. My blood went cold. David Bronston is my late husband. He passed away 30 years ago. I understand this must be confusing, Mrs. Bronston. We have a David Bronston here who was brought in after a car accident. He's been unconscious for 2 days, and we found your contact information in his wallet. The address matches your current residence. The world tilted. That's impossible. My husband is buried at Greenwood Cemetery. I visit his grave every month. Ma'am, I understand this is shocking. Could you possibly come to the hospital? We need someone to identify this patient, and you're the only contact we have. I left work immediately, my hands shaking as I drove to the hospital. This had to be some terrible mistake, some cosmic coincidence. Maybe someone with the same name, maybe old paperwork that had gotten mixed up somehow. But when they led me into that hospital room, when I saw the man lying unconscious in the bed, my legs nearly gave out. It was David. Older, grayer, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 30 years ago, but unmistakably my husband. The man I'd buried, the man I'd mourned, the man whose death had shaped every decision I'd made for 3 decades. This is impossible, I whispered, gripping the bed rail to keep from falling. The doctor, a young man who looked barely older than Tommy, checked his chart. Mrs. Bronston, I know this must be overwhelming. Can you confirm this is your husband? Yes, but he died 30 years ago. I was at his funeral. I buried him. The doctor exchanged glances with the nurse. Ma'am, according to his medical records, David Bronston has been living in Portland, Oregon for the past 28 years. He was visiting the city on business when the accident occurred. Portland. He'd been alive in Portland while I'd been struggling to raise our children alone, while I'd worked myself into heart problems, while I'd sacrificed everything because I thought I was all they had left. I need to sit down, I managed. They brought me a chair, and I stared at the man in the bed, my husband, who wasn't dead, who had somehow been living a completely different life while I'd been drowning in poverty and loneliness. Mrs. Bronston, the doctor continued gently, we found some documents in his belongings that might help explain the situation. There's a lawyer's business card and some legal papers. Would you like us to contact the attorney? I nodded, unable to speak. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Wells, arrived within 2 hours. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of Dr. Rodriguez. Mrs. Bronston, she said, settling into the chair beside David's bed, I represent your husband in some estate matters. I think there are some things you need to know. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. 30 years ago, David Bronston was involved in a car accident that left him with severe amnesia. He was found with no identification, no memory of his past life. He was treated at a hospital in Portland and eventually released into the care of social services. My head was spinning. But the funeral, the body you buried was misidentified. There was a clerical error at the morgue. 2 John Does brought in the same night, both victims of car accidents. The wrong body was released to your family. I felt like I was drowning. So David has been alive this whole time? With amnesia? Yes, but Mrs. Bronston, there's more. About 5 years ago, David's memory began returning in fragments. He remembered his name, remembered being married, remembered having children. He hired me to help him find his family. Find us? But we've been in the same place. I never moved from our old neighborhood until 3 months ago. Patricia's expression grew troubled. Mrs. Bronston, we did find you. We found all of you. David has been trying to reconnect with his family for 5 years. The room seemed to spin. That's impossible. No one contacted me. We contacted your children first, thinking they might be the best way to approach the situation. We reached out to Michael, Sarah, and Thomas Bronston. My children. They'd known. For 5 years, they'd known their father was alive. What did they say? I whispered. Patricia hesitated. Mrs. Bronston, I think you should know that your children, they asked us not to contact you. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? They said that you had moved on, that you were fragile, that learning about David's survival would be too traumatic for you. They said they would handle telling you when the time was right. 5 years. My children had known their father was alive for 5 years and had chosen to keep it from me. While I'd been struggling with heart problems, while I'd been begging them for help, while they'd been calling me dramatic and telling me to be more independent, they'd known that David was alive and looking for us. There's something else, Patricia continued. David never stopped loving you, Mrs. Bronston. When his memory returned, the first thing he remembered was your face. He's been living modestly in Portland, saving every penny, hoping to reunite with his family. He wanted to make sure he could provide for you, that he could make up for all the lost years. She pulled out another document. He's been working with financial advisors, making investments, building something for your future together. Mrs. Bronston, your husband is worth approximately $150 million. The number didn't register at first. It was too large, too impossible. I'm sorry, what? David invested in several tech startups in Portland during the early days of the industry. His investments have grown exponentially over the past 20 years. He's been living in a modest apartment, driving an old car, putting every dollar toward building a future for you and your children. $150 million. While I'd been eating ramen noodles and working 3 jobs, while my children had been building their careers and cutting me out of their lives, David had been building a fortune meant for all of us. He wanted to surprise you, Patricia continued. He was planning to return home next month with enough money to ensure you'd never have to worry about anything again. The accident happened while he was driving here to finalize some legal documents. I looked at David's unconscious face, at the man I'd mourned for 30 years, the man who'd been trying to come home to me while our children had been actively preventing our reunion. My children, I said slowly. They knew he was alive, and they told you not to contact me. Yes. They said they were protecting you. But I knew the truth. They hadn't been protecting me, they'd been protecting themselves. They'd been protecting their carefully constructed lives, their professional images, their freedom from the burden of caring for their poor, embarrassing mother. They'd stolen 5 years of my life with David. 5 years when I could have been happy instead of heartbroken, secure instead of struggling, loved instead of abandoned. And they'd done it while watching me beg them for help, while dismissing my health problems, while treating me like an inconvenience they wished would disappear. As I sat beside David's hospital bed, holding the hand of the husband I'd thought was dead, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not just hurt or disappointment, but a cold, crystalline rage that settled in my chest like ice. My children had betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. They'd stolen my chance at happiness, my chance at security, my chance at love, all to protect their own selfish interests. But they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. They had no idea that their father was worth $150 million, or that every penny of it was legally mine. They had no idea that their cruelty had been documented, that their abandonment had been witnessed, that their lies were about to be exposed. Most importantly, they had no idea that the poor, powerless mother they'd discarded was about to become the most powerful person in their lives. The war was about to begin, and for the first time in 30 years, I held all the weapons. David woke up on the third day, and the first word he spoke was my name. Margaret. His voice was hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning, but his eyes, those same warm brown eyes I'd fallen in love with 40 years ago, focused on my face with perfect recognition. "I'm here," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "I'm right here." "I've been trying to come home to you for so long," he said, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I remembered everything, your laugh, the way you hummed while cooking, how you used to fall asleep reading to the kids. I remembered loving you, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't find you." Patricia Wells had prepared me for this conversation, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of seeing my husband, alive, real, reaching for me after 30 years of believing he was gone. "The children," he said suddenly, struggling to sit up. "Michael, Sarah, Tommy, are they okay? Are they here?" My heart clenched. He didn't know. He had no idea what our children had become, what they'd done to me, how they'd actively prevented this reunion. They're successful," I said carefully. "They've built good lives for themselves." "I can't wait to see them," David said, his face lighting up with joy. "I've missed so much. Graduations, weddings, grandchildren maybe?" "Patricia told me they're all doing well, but she said they wanted to wait for the right time to tell you I was alive." "I understand, it must have been such a shock." I looked at Patricia, who was standing quietly in the corner. We'd agreed that David needed to recover his strength before learning the full truth about our children's betrayal. His heart was still weak from the accident, and the doctors had warned that emotional stress could be dangerous. "They'll be so happy to know you're awake," I lied, hating myself for it. But even as I spoke the words, I was planning. Patricia had explained the legal situation to me in detail. David's entire fortune was held in a trust that named me as the primary beneficiary. Our children weren't mentioned in any of the documents. David had planned to include them once we were reunited and he could assess their needs. More importantly, the trust had a very specific clause that Patricia said David had insisted on. If David died or became incapacitated, the money would only be released to me if I could prove that I had been abandoned or neglected by my heirs during a time of medical or financial need. David had somehow known, even with his fragmented memories, that our children might not be the people we'd raised them to be. He'd built in protection for me, a way to ensure that if they'd become selfish or cruel, I wouldn't be left defenseless. And my children, in their arrogance and cruelty, had given me exactly the proof I needed. I spent the next week at David's bedside, watching him grow stronger while I grew angrier. Every day, he asked about the children. Every day, I made excuses for why they hadn't visited yet. Maybe we should call them, David suggested on his fifth day awake. I know this is overwhelming, but I'm so eager to see them. Let me handle that, I said. I want to prepare them properly. What I really wanted was to prepare myself. Because I'd decided that my children needed to face the consequences of their choices. They needed to understand exactly what they'd thrown away, exactly how much their cruelty had cost them. I called Michael first. Mom? He sounded surprised to hear from me. We hadn't spoken since that devastating conversation about my heart problems 3 months ago. Michael, I need to tell you something important. It's about your father. My father's been dead for 30 years, Mom. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should talk to someone about. Your father is alive, Michael. He's been alive this whole time, and he's in the hospital here in the city. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. That's impossible, he finally said. It's not impossible. It's true. There was a mistake 30 years ago, a misidentification at the morgue. Your father had amnesia from his accident, but his memory has been returning. He's been looking for us. Another long pause. Mom, this sounds like, are you sure you're not having some kind of breakdown? This is a pretty elaborate delusion. It's not a delusion, Michael. I'm sitting in his hospital room right now. He was in a car accident a week ago, and that's how I found out he was alive. Prove it, Michael said suddenly. If this is real, prove it. I put the phone on speaker and held it toward David, who was dozing in his hospital bed. David, I said softly. David, Michael is on the phone. David's eyes opened, and when he heard Michael's name, his face transformed with joy. Michael? My son? Is that really you? I heard Michael's sharp intake of breath through the phone. Dad? Michael's voice cracked like he was 7 years old again. Oh, Michael, David said, tears streaming down his face. I've missed you so much. I've been trying to find you, trying to come home. I'm so sorry I've been gone. I'm so sorry. The phone went quiet except for the sound of Michael crying. Dad, we thought you were dead. We buried you. How's this possible? David explained about the amnesia, about the misidentification, about his memories slowly returning. He talked about how much he'd missed, how sorry he was, how much he loved Michael and wanted to make up for lost time. I want to see you, David said. I want to see all of you. Your mother says you've all done so well, built such successful lives. I'm so proud of you. I'll be there tomorrow, Michael said quickly. I'll catch the first flight out. After David fell back asleep, I called Sarah and Tommy with the same news. Their reactions were identical: shock, disbelief, then overwhelming emotion when they heard David's voice. Both promised to come immediately. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that Patricia Wells had been trying to contact them for 5 years. I knew they'd been lying to David's lawyer, claiming they were protecting me while actually protecting themselves. I knew that when they arrived at the hospital, they would be expecting to see the same broken, powerless woman they'd abandoned 3 months ago. They would be expecting to manage this situation, to control the narrative, to find a way to benefit from David's return without having to acknowledge their cruelty to me. They had no idea that I knew about their betrayal. They had no idea about the $150 million. They had no idea that their father had built legal protections specifically designed to punish children who abandoned their parents. Most importantly, they had no idea that I was no longer the desperate, begging woman who'd called them for help with her heart medication. I was no longer powerless. I was a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Patricia arrived that evening with more documents for me to review. Mrs. Bronston, she said quietly, I need to prepare you for what's coming. When your children arrive, they're going to try to take control of this situation. They're going to want to manage David's care, his finances, his legal affairs. They may even try to have you declared incompetent to make medical decisions. Can they do that? They can try. But David was very specific in his legal documents. You are his wife, his primary beneficiary, and his designated medical power of attorney. As long as you're mentally competent, which you clearly are, they have no legal standing. She pulled out another folder. There's something else you should know. I've been documenting your children's refusal to allow contact between you and David for 5 years. I have emails, recorded phone calls, written statements. When the time comes to prove abandonment and neglect for the trust requirements, we have overwhelming evidence. What happens when they find out about the money? Patricia's smile was sharp. That depends entirely on how you want to handle it. You could tell them immediately, or you could wait and see how they behave. You could give them a chance to redeem themselves, or you could let them dig their own graves deeper. I thought about Michael dismissing my heart problems as drama. I thought about Sarah deleting my comments on her social media posts. I thought about Tommy calling me a complication, telling me I was being too dependent. I thought about 5 years of loneliness that could have been 5 years of happiness with David. I want to see exactly who they really are, I said. I want to give them every opportunity to show me their true character. And if they fail that test? I looked at David sleeping peacefully in his hospital bed, at the man who'd spent 20 years building a fortune just to take care of me, at the husband who'd never stopped loving me even when he couldn't remember my name. Then they'll learn that actions have consequences, I said, and that the mother they threw away was worth more than they ever imagined. The next morning, I prepared for war. I dressed carefully in my best outfit, a simple dress I'd sewn myself, clean but obviously inexpensive. I wanted to look exactly like the poor, powerless woman my children expected to see. Because the biggest advantage in any battle is being underestimated by your enemies. And my children were about to underestimate me in the most spectacular way possible. Michael arrived first, striding into the hospital room like he owned the place. He wore a $1,000 suit and carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. When he saw David awake and alert, his composure cracked for just a moment. I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who'd saved his allowance to buy me flowers on Mother's Day. But the moment passed quickly. Dad, Michael said, his voice carefully controlled. This is incredible. We have so much to catch up on. David's face lit up with pure joy. Michael, look at you. You're so successful, so accomplished. Your mother told me you're a vice president now. That's right, Michael said, but his eyes were already scanning the room, taking inventory. I could see him calculating the private room, the expensive medical equipment, the round-the-clock nursing care. Dad, who's handling your medical expenses? This level of care must be costing a fortune. Don't worry about that, David said. I've been working, saving money. I wanted to make sure I could take care of your mother when I found her. Michael's eyebrows rose slightly. Working? What kind of work? Investments, mostly. I got lucky with some tech companies in Portland. I watched Michael's expression change as he processed this information. His father wasn't the broken, penniless man he'd expected. There was money involved, potentially significant money. That's great, Dad. Really smart. Michael pulled out his phone. I should probably help you get organized. Financial planning, legal documents, medical decisions. This is a lot to handle, and Mom's not really equipped to deal with complex financial matters. The casual dismissal of my capabilities stung, but I kept my expression neutral. I wanted to see how far he would go. Your mother is perfectly capable, David said firmly. She's been handling everything beautifully. Of course, Michael said quickly. I just meant that with your medical situation, it might be helpful to have someone with financial experience involved. I deal with high-net-worth clients all the time. Sarah arrived an hour later, and the dynamic in the room shifted immediately. She swept in wearing designer clothes and expensive perfume, her social media smile perfectly in place. "Daddy," she exclaimed, rushing to David's bedside with theatrical emotion. "I can't believe you're really here. This is like a miracle." David beamed at her, and I watched Sarah work her charm, the same charm she'd used to manipulate teachers, boyfriends, and eventually business clients. She was good at making people feel special, at making them believe she cared deeply about them. "Sarah, you're so beautiful," David said. "Just like your mother was at your age." Sarah's smile flickered for just a moment when he compared her to me, but she recovered quickly. "Dad, I've been thinking," she said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "This whole situation is so overwhelming. Maybe we should get you moved to a better facility, somewhere with top-tier care. I know people in the medical industry. I could make some calls." "This hospital has been wonderful," David said. "And I want to stay close to your mother." "Of course," Sarah said, but I caught the look she exchanged with Michael. They were already planning, already strategizing how to take control. Tommy arrived that evening, and the family reunion was complete. He was quieter than his siblings, more subdued, but I could see the same calculating look in his eyes. "Dad," he said after the initial emotional greeting, "I've been thinking about the practical aspects of this situation. You've been gone for 30 years. There are going to be legal complications, identity verification issues, financial documentation problems. I have lawyers who specialize in complex cases like this." "That's very thoughtful," David said. "But I already have legal representation. Patricia Wells has been helping me for years." I saw all three of my children tense at this information. They'd been hoping to control the legal aspects of David's return, to position themselves as the responsible parties managing his affairs. "Years?" Michael asked carefully. "How long have you been working with this lawyer?" "About 5 years," David said. "Ever since my memory started coming back. She's been helping me search for my family." The room went dead silent. I watched my children's faces as they realized what David had just revealed, that he'd been looking for us for 5 years, that there had been a lawyer involved, that their story about protecting me from the shock of his survival was about to unravel. 5 years. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," David said, oblivious to the tension. "Patricia tried to contact you children first, thinking that would be the best approach. She said you were very concerned about your mother's emotional well-being, that you wanted to handle telling her when the time was right. I appreciated how protective you were of her." I watched my children's faces as the full weight of their situation hit them. David didn't know they'd been lying. He didn't know they'd abandoned me. He thought they'd been protecting me out of love, not protecting themselves out of selfishness. "Dad," Michael said carefully, "maybe we should talk privately about some of these details. Mom's been through a lot lately with her health issues, and..." "Health issues?" David's attention snapped to me immediately. "Margaret, what health issues? Are you okay?" The moment of truth had arrived. I could lie, protect my children's secret, maintain the fiction that they'd been caring and supportive. Or I could tell David exactly what kind of people our children had become. "I had some heart problems a few months ago," I said quietly. "The doctor said I needed to reduce my work hours, cut back on stress." "Work hours?" David looked confused. "Margaret, what kind of work have you been doing?" I saw my children shift uncomfortably. They'd never told David about my decades of menial labor, about the cleaning jobs and diner work, about the poverty I'd endured while raising them. "I've been working to support myself," I said simply. "Cleaning offices, working at the library. Whatever I could find." David's face went white. "Support yourself? But the children, surely they've been helping you? You raised them, sacrificed everything for them." The silence in the room was deafening. "Dad," Tommy said quickly, "it's complicated. Mom's always been very independent, very proud. She didn't want our help." The lie hung in the air like poison. "Is that true, Margaret?" David asked, his eyes searching my face. "Did you refuse their help?" This was the moment. The moment when I could either protect my children's lies or expose their cruelty. The moment when I could either maintain the peace or start the war. I thought about the phone calls where they dismissed my heart problems as drama. I thought about Sarah deleting my comments on her social media. I thought about Tommy calling me a complication. I thought about 5 years of loneliness while they actively prevented David from finding me. No, I said quietly. That's not true. David's expression changed, becoming sharp and focused. What do you mean? I called them when I got sick, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I asked for help with the medication costs, with basic living expenses while I recovered. They all refused. That's not, Michael started, but I cut him off. Michael told me he was leveraged and couldn't take on additional expenses. Sarah said I was being dramatic about my health problems and suggested I look into government programs. Tommy said I was being too dependent and that people in his position are judged by their associations. David's face was transforming as I spoke, the joy and love being replaced by something cold and terrible. They said I was a complication, I continued. An embarrassment. A burden they couldn't afford to be associated with. Margaret, Sarah said desperately, you're taking things out of context. We were just trying to encourage your independence. Independence. David's voice was deadly quiet. She's been working cleaning jobs at 70 years old because you wouldn't help her with heart medication? Dad, you don't understand, Tommy said. We have our own lives, our own responsibilities. Your own responsibilities? David sat up in bed, and I could see the man he'd been before the accident, strong, protective, fierce when his family was threatened. Your mother is your responsibility. She raised you alone for 30 years because she thought I was dead. She sacrificed everything for you. We didn't ask her to sacrifice, Michael began. Get out. David's voice filled the room like thunder. All of you. Get out of my sight. Dad, please, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. Let us explain. Explain what? Explain how you abandoned the woman who gave you everything? Explain how you let her work herself into heart problems while you lived in luxury? Explain how you've been lying to my lawyer for 5 years, preventing me from finding the woman I love. My children went white. They hadn't realized that David would eventually learn about their deception, that Patricia would tell him how they'd blocked his attempts to reunite with me. You knew, David said, his voice breaking. You knew I was alive, and you kept us apart. You stole 5 years from us. 5 years when your mother could have been happy instead of struggling alone. We were protecting her, Tommy tried one last time. You were protecting yourselves, David said. You were protecting your precious reputations, your comfortable lives, your freedom from having to care about anyone but yourselves. He turned to me, his eyes filled with tears and rage. Margaret, I am so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't here to protect you from them. I'm sorry you had to suffer because of their selfishness. Then he looked back at my children, and his voice became ice cold. You want to know about my investments? You want to know about the money I've been saving? I've spent 20 years building a fortune worth $150 million. Every penny of it was meant for your mother, to make up for the years I couldn't provide for her. I watched my children's faces as the number hit them. $150 million. More money than they'd ever dreamed of, more than all their combined net worth. But you know what? David continued. After seeing who you really are, after learning how you treated the woman who gave you life, I wouldn't give you a single dollar. Not 1 penny. Dad, please, Michael said, his voice cracking. We can fix this. We can make it right. No, David said. You can't. Because this isn't about money. This is about character. And you've shown me exactly who you are. He pressed the call button for the nurse. I want these people removed from my room. They are not welcome here. As security escorted my children out, I heard Sarah sobbing, Michael arguing with the guards, Tommy trying to negotiate. But it was too late. They'd revealed their true nature, and there was no taking it back. David reached for my hand as the room fell quiet. "Margaret," he said softly, "I promise you'll never have to worry about anything again. And I promise that our children will face the consequences of their choices." I squeezed his hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in 30 years, the security of being truly loved and protected. But I also felt something else. A cold satisfaction as I realized that my children had just destroyed their own lives with their greed and cruelty. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. And now they knew exactly what they'd lost. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Michael, Sarah, Tommy calling over and over, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I let every call go to voicemail, sitting beside David's hospital bed as we listened to our children's panic unfold in real time. "Mom, please pick up." Sarah's voice was thick with tears. "I know you're angry, but we need to talk. We can fix this. Please don't let Dad make any permanent decisions while he's emotional." Michael's messages were more calculated. "Mom, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. I realize we may have seemed insensitive, but you have to understand the pressure we've been under. Let's meet and discuss this rationally." Tommy's approach was pure manipulation. "Mom, I love you. We all love you. Yesterday was just a misunderstanding. Dad doesn't understand the full context of our relationship. Please don't let him destroy our family over a miscommunication." David listened to each message with growing disgust. "Miscommunication," he repeated after Tommy's voicemail ended. "They think abandoning you was a miscommunication." Patricia Wells arrived at noon with a briefcase full of documents and a grim expression. "Mrs. Bronston, Mr. Bronston," she said, settling into the chair beside David's bed. "I need to inform you that your children have retained legal counsel. They're challenging David's mental competency and your authority to make medical decisions." "On what grounds?" David asked. "They're claiming that the trauma of the accident and the emotional shock of reunion have impaired your judgment. They're also suggesting that Margaret may be manipulating you against your children for financial gain." I felt like I'd been slapped. "They're claiming I'm manipulating him?" "It gets worse," Patricia continued. "They've filed for emergency guardianship, claiming that both of you are vulnerable adults who need protection from each other. They're painting a picture of a confused, elderly man being taken advantage of by a bitter, mentally unstable woman." David's face went red with rage. "How dare they?" "There's more," Patricia said. "They've also filed a motion to freeze all of David's assets pending a competency hearing. They're claiming that any financial decisions made in his current state should be considered invalid." The full scope of my children's betrayal was becoming clear. They weren't just trying to reconcile, they were trying to take control of everything. They wanted to have David declared incompetent so they could manage his fortune themselves. "Can they do this?" I asked. "They can try," Patricia said. "But they've made a critical error. By filing these motions, they've created a legal record of their attempt to control David's assets. This actually strengthens our case for the abandonment clause in the trust." She pulled out a thick folder. "I've been documenting everything: their refusal to allow contact for 5 years, their abandonment of you during your medical crisis, and now their attempt to have you both declared incompetent when they learned about the money. It's a clear pattern of financial motivation." "What happens now?" David asked. "Now we fight," Patricia said. "But I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Your children are going to attack your character, your mental state, your relationship with each other. They're going to try to prove that you're both unfit to make decisions." That afternoon, the attacks began in earnest. Michael held a press conference outside the hospital, flanked by his expensive lawyers. "My father has been through tremendous trauma," he told the cameras. 30 years of amnesia, a recent car accident, and now the emotional shock of reunion. "We're concerned that he's not in a position to make sound financial decisions. We're also concerned about the influence of certain individuals who may be taking advantage of his vulnerable state. The certain individuals was clearly me. My own son was publicly suggesting that I was a gold digger manipulating his confused father. Sarah took to social media, posting carefully crafted messages about her beloved father's return and her family's concern for his well-being. The comments section filled with sympathy for her difficult situation and speculation about the money-hungry woman trying to steal her father's fortune. Tommy was more direct. He showed up at the hospital with a team of doctors, demanding a psychiatric evaluation for David. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said when security prevented him from entering the room. "But you're not thinking clearly. This woman has been poisoning you against your own children. We're your family. We love you. We're just trying to protect you." David watched the news coverage from his hospital bed, his face growing harder with each report. "They're destroying us publicly," he said, "making us look like criminals." "Let them," I said, surprising myself with the coldness in my voice. "Let them show the world exactly who they are." But privately, I was terrified. My children had money, lawyers, public sympathy. They were painting themselves as loving children trying to protect their vulnerable father from a manipulative woman. And I was just a poor cleaning lady with a high school education going up against 3 successful professionals. The competency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Patricia explained that if David was declared incompetent, my children would become his legal guardians with control over all his assets. "What about the trust?" I asked. "If they gain guardianship, they could challenge the trust documents, claim they were created while David was mentally impaired. It would tie everything up in court for years." The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat beside David's bed, watching him rest, thinking about how quickly everything had changed. A week ago, I'd been a forgotten, abandoned mother. Now I was at the center of a legal battle worth $150 million. "Margaret," David said softly. I thought he was sleeping, but his eyes were open in the darkness. "I'm here. Are you sorry about all of this? If I'd stayed dead, you wouldn't be going through this nightmare." I took his hand. "David, these past few days with you have been the happiest I've had in 30 years. Whatever happens, I'm grateful for that." "I failed you," he said. "I failed our children. I should have been here to teach them how to be decent human beings. You didn't fail anyone. The accident wasn't your fault. But what they became, that's on both of us. We raised them to believe they were entitled to everything, that their happiness mattered more than anyone else's. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, all the times I'd put their needs before my own, all the lessons I'd taught them about taking without giving back." "Maybe," I said. "But they're adults now. They made their choices." The morning of the hearing, my children arrived at the courthouse like conquering heroes. They'd hired a public relations firm, and supporters filled the gallery, colleagues, friends, people who believed their story about protecting their vulnerable father. I sat alone at the plaintiff's table with Patricia, wearing my best dress, the same simple outfit I'd worn to David's bedside. I looked exactly like what I was, a poor, elderly woman going up against powerful, wealthy opponents. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who listened impassively as my children's lawyer painted a picture of David as a confused, traumatized man being manipulated by a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "Mr. Bronston has been through extraordinary trauma. 30 years of amnesia, followed by a serious car accident, followed by the emotional shock of reunion. He is not in a position to make rational decisions about his finances or his relationships." He gestured toward me. "Mrs. Bronston has spent 30 years believing her husband was dead. She's clearly harboring resentment toward her children for their success while she struggled in poverty. Now, suddenly presented with a fortune, She's manipulating Mr. Bronston's emotions to turn him against his own family. Michael took the stand first, presenting himself as the concerned, responsible son. Your Honor, my father is not the man he was before the accident. He's confused, emotional, easily influenced. Yesterday, he told us he never wanted to see us again, but that's not the father who raised us. That's a man who's been convinced that his children are his enemies. Sarah's testimony was even more damaging. She cried on the stand as she described her beloved father's condition. He doesn't remember us properly, she sobbed. He thinks we're strangers, thinks we abandoned our mother out of cruelty. But we were just trying to live our own lives, to be independent like he taught us. We never abandoned anyone. Tommy's testimony was the most calculated. He presented financial records showing his success, character witnesses attesting to his integrity, medical experts questioning David's mental state. Your Honor, my father built a fortune, but he did it while suffering from brain trauma. Any decisions he's making now should be considered suspect. We're not trying to steal from him, we're trying to protect him. When it was our turn, Patricia called David to the stand. He walked slowly but steadily to the witness box, his back straight, his eyes clear. Mr. Bronston, Patricia began, do you understand why you're here today? Yes. My children are trying to have me declared incompetent so they can control my money. And why do you think they're doing that? David looked directly at his children. Because they've learned that I'm worth $150 million, and they want to make sure they get their hands on it despite the fact that they abandoned their mother when she needed them most. The courtroom erupted. My children's lawyer objected, but David continued. For 5 years, they prevented me from reuniting with my wife. They told my lawyer that they were protecting her, but they were really protecting themselves. They didn't want the burden of caring for their poor, sick mother. And when I finally found her and learned how they'd treated her, they realized they'd made a terrible mistake. Mr. Bronston, do you believe you're mentally competent to make decisions about your finances? I've been making successful investment decisions for 20 years. I built a $150 million fortune while living modestly and saving every penny for my wife. I think that demonstrates pretty clear thinking. When Patricia called me to the stand, I was terrified. But as I looked out at the courtroom, at my children's faces filled with greed and desperation, I found my strength. Mrs. Bronston, Patricia said, did you manipulate your husband against his children? No. I told him the truth about how they treated me. I let him hear their own words, their own choices. What do you want from this situation? I looked directly at my children. I want them to face the consequences of their actions. For 30 years, I believed that love was enough, that sacrifice was noble, that my children would eventually appreciate what I'd given them. I was wrong. They need to learn that actions have consequences, and that the people you throw away might be worth more than you ever imagined. The judge recessed for deliberation, and I sat in the hallway with David and Patricia, waiting for our fate to be decided. Whatever happens, David said, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You stood up for yourself today. You told the truth. I'm scared, I admitted. So am I, he said. But we're together now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. When the judge returned, her expression was unreadable. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, she began, I find that Mr. David Bronston is mentally competent to make his own decisions regarding his finances and medical care. The petition for guardianship is denied. My children's faces crumpled in defeat. However, the judge continued, this case has revealed some troubling family dynamics that warrant further investigation. I'm ordering a full audit of Mr. Bronston's trust documents and the circumstances surrounding the abandonment allegations. As we left the courthouse, my children tried one last desperate approach. Mom, Dad, please, Sarah called out. We can work this out as a family. We don't need lawyers and courts. We love you. David stopped and turned to face them. You love us, he said quietly. You love us so much that you abandoned your mother when she was sick? You love us so much that you kept us apart for 5 years? You love us so much that you tried to have us declared incompetent when you learned about the money. We made mistakes, Michael said desperately. But we're family. Family forgives. You're right, David said. Family does forgive. But you're not family anymore. You're strangers who happen to share our DNA. As we walked away, I heard Sarah screaming behind us, You can't do this. We're your children. That money belongs to us. And in that moment, I realized that my children had finally shown their true faces to the world. They'd revealed themselves as exactly what they were, greedy, selfish people who saw their parents as nothing more than sources of money and status. The war was far from over. But for the first time in 30 years, I was winning. The weeks following the competency hearing were the strangest of my life. David and I moved into a modest hotel suite while we looked for a permanent place to live, and for the first time in decades, I didn't have to worry about money. David insisted on buying me new clothes, proper meals, anything I wanted, but I found myself overwhelmed by choices I'd never had before. Margaret, he said one morning over breakfast, you keep ordering the cheapest thing on the menu. You know we can afford anything, right? I stared at the menu, at prices that would have represented a week's groceries in my old life. I know. It's just hard to believe it's real. The media attention had died down somewhat, but the damage to my children's reputations was severe. Michael's investment firm had quietly asked him to take a leave of absence after clients began questioning his character. Sarah's marketing agency had lost several major accounts when her public meltdown outside the courthouse went viral. Tommy's startup investors were reconsidering their partnerships. They'd destroyed their own lives in their desperate grab for money that was never theirs to begin with. But the real test was still coming. Patricia called us to her office on a gray Thursday morning with news that would change everything. The trust audit is complete, she said, spreading documents across her conference table. The abandonment clause has been officially triggered. Mrs. Bronston, you now have legal access to the entire $150 million estate. David squeezed my hand. It's over then. Margaret gets everything she deserves. Not quite, Patricia said carefully. There's one more decision to make. The trust documents include a provision that David insisted on, a final choice clause. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. Mrs. Bronston, you have the option to forgive your children and include them in the inheritance. If you choose to do so, the money would be split equally among all four of you. You'd receive $75 million, and your children would each receive $25 million. I stared at the document. And if I don't forgive them? Then you receive the full amount, and they receive nothing. But Margaret, you need to understand, this choice is permanent. Once you sign either document, it cannot be changed. David was quiet for a long moment. What are you thinking, Margaret? I thought about Michael at 7 years old, saving his allowance to buy me flowers. I thought about Sarah drawing pictures of the beautiful dresses she'd make for me someday. I thought about Tommy trying to carry groceries that were too heavy for him, insisting he was the man of the house. I thought about the children I'd raised and the strangers they'd become. I need time, I said. That evening, as David and I sat in our hotel room, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Bronston? This is Dr. Martinez from Children's Hospital. I'm calling about your granddaughter. My blood went cold. My granddaughter? Emma Bronston, age 6. She's been admitted with acute leukemia. Her father, Thomas Bronston, listed you as an emergency contact. Tommy had a daughter. A 6-year-old daughter I'd never met, never even known existed. I'll be right there, I said. The children's cancer ward was a place of quiet desperation and fierce hope. I found Tommy sitting in a plastic chair outside a room marked with cartoon characters, his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and I saw a man I barely recognized, a hollow-eyed, unshaven, broken. "Mom," he whispered. "You came. Tell me about Emma," I said. She's everything good in the world," Tommy said, tears streaming down his face. "Smart, funny, brave. She loves to draw, just like Sarah did. She asks about you sometimes, about her grandmother she's never met. Why didn't you tell me about her?" Tommy's face crumpled. "Because I was ashamed. Ashamed of how I'd treated you, ashamed of the man I'd become. I didn't want her to see that side of me. I thought I could keep my two worlds separate." Through the window, I could see a small figure in the hospital bed, a little girl with Tommy's eyes and David's stubborn chin, surrounded by machines and tubes. "The treatment," Tommy continued, "it's experimental, expensive. My insurance will cover some of it, but not all. I've liquidated everything, my stocks, my savings, my house. It's not enough." I understood now why he'd listed me as an emergency contact. Not because he wanted me in his life, but because he was desperate. "How much do you need?" I asked. $2 million. Maybe more, depending on how she responds to treatment. $2 million. A fortune to the woman I'd been a month ago, pocket change to the woman I was now. "Mom," Tommy said, grabbing my hand. "I know I don't deserve to ask. I know what I did to you is unforgivable. But she's innocent. She's just a little girl who wants to live." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The successful entrepreneur was gone, replaced by a terrified father who would do anything to save his child. "Where's her mother?" I asked. "Lisa died in a car accident 2 years ago. It's just been Emma and me since then." "And you never thought to tell me I had a granddaughter?" Tommy's face flushed with shame. "I was going to. After Lisa died, I almost called you so many times. But I was so deep in my own selfishness, my own pride. I convinced myself that you were better off without us, that we'd only bring you pain." "You were right about bringing me pain," I said. "But you were wrong about everything else." I walked into Emma's room, and she opened her eyes as I approached her bed. She was beautiful, pale from illness, but with an inner light that reminded me of my children when they were young and innocent. "Are you my grandma?" she asked in a small voice. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm your grandma. Daddy said you were far away, but that you loved me even though we'd never met. Is that true?" I felt my heart break and heal at the same time. "Yes, Emma. That's true." "I drew you a picture," she said, reaching for a piece of paper on her bedside table. "Daddy told me you like flowers." The drawing was simple but beautiful, a stick figure woman surrounded by colorful flowers, with "I love you, Grandma" written in crayon across the top. "It's the most beautiful picture I've ever seen," I said, and I meant it. Over the next 3 days, I spent every moment I could at Emma's bedside. She was everything Tommy had said, bright, brave, full of life despite her illness. She told me about her school, her friends, her dreams of becoming an artist like her Aunt Sarah used to be. "Daddy cries sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping," she confided in me. "He's scared I'm going to go to heaven like Mommy did." "What do you think about that?" I asked. "I think heaven can wait," she said with 6-year-old determination. "I have too much stuff to do here first." On the 3rd day, Michael and Sarah arrived at the hospital. They looked as broken as Tommy, their perfect lives crumbling around them, their reputations destroyed, their futures uncertain. "Mom," Sarah said quietly, "we heard about Emma. We needed to see her." I watched my daughter meet her niece for the first time, saw the genuine love and pain in her eyes as she looked at the sick little girl. "She looks like you did at that age," I told Sarah. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered. "I can't believe I've missed 6 years of her life." Michael was quieter, more reserved, but I saw him slip a small toy into Emma's hands, a stuffed elephant that made her giggle despite her weakness. "Uncle Michael," she said, Grandma says you're really smart with money. Can you help Daddy figure out how to pay for my medicine? Michael's composure cracked completely. I'll figure something out, sweetheart. I promise. That night, my 3 children and I sat in the hospital cafeteria, having our first real conversation in years. Mom, Michael said, we know we don't deserve forgiveness. We know we destroyed any right we had to your love or your money. But Emma is innocent, I finished. I know. We're not asking for ourselves, Sarah said. We're asking for her. She needs that treatment, and we don't have the money. What about your successful careers? I asked. Your investments, your savings? Gone, Tommy said simply. I've liquidated everything. Michael's been fired. Sarah's lost most of her clients. We destroyed our own lives with our greed. And now you want me to save you? No, Michael said firmly. We want you to save her. We'll figure out our own lives. We'll live with the consequences of our choices. But Emma shouldn't have to pay for our mistakes. I looked at my children, really looked at them. For the first time in years, I saw genuine remorse in their eyes. Not the calculated manipulation they'd tried before, but real understanding of what they'd done and real grief for what they'd lost. There's something you need to know, I said. About the inheritance. I told them about the choice clause, about the option to forgive them and share the money. I watched their faces as they realized that their financial salvation was entirely in my hands. Mom, Sarah said quietly, whatever you decide, we'll understand. We know we don't deserve your forgiveness. But Emma deserves her chance, Tommy added. Whether you forgive us or not, please don't let our mistakes cost her life. I thought about the woman I'd been a month ago, broken, abandoned, forgotten. I thought about the woman I was now, powerful, wealthy, finally in control. I thought about the choice that would define not just my future, but the future of my entire family. I need one more night to decide, I said. That night, I sat beside Emma's bed while she slept, holding her small hand in mine. David sat beside me, both of us watching this beautiful child fight for her life. What are you thinking? He asked softly. I'm thinking about justice, I said. About consequences. About whether forgiveness is weakness or strength. What does your heart tell you? I looked at Emma's peaceful face, at the drawing she'd made for me taped to the wall beside her bed. My heart tells me that some things are more important than revenge, I said. But my mind tells me that my children need to learn that actions have consequences. So, what will you choose? I squeezed Emma's hand gently, feeling her pulse strong and steady beneath my fingers. I'm going to choose the future, I said. But not the way anyone expects. The next morning, I called Patricia and asked her to meet me at the hospital with both documents, the forgiveness clause and the full inheritance papers. It was time to make the choice that would change everything. But first, I had one more surprise for my children. One more lesson to teach them about the true cost of their betrayal. Because the most powerful choice isn't always the most obvious one. I called my children to Emma's hospital room the next morning. Patricia arrived with both documents, and David wheeled himself in from his physical therapy session. The small room felt crowded with the weight of 30 years of pain, betrayal, and broken promises. Emma was awake, coloring in a book I'd brought her, occasionally looking up at the adults gathered around her bed with curious 6-year-old eyes. Grandma, she said, why does everyone look so serious? We're having an important family meeting, sweetheart, I said, smoothing her hair. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions. My children sat in uncomfortable silence, their eyes fixed on the documents in Patricia's hands. They knew their entire future hung in the balance of my choice. Before I make my decision, I said, there are some things you need to understand. Things about your father's money, about how he earned it, and about what he really wanted for this family. I pulled out a folder Patricia had prepared, financial records, investment documents, and most importantly, a letter David had written 5 years ago when his memory first returned. Your father didn't just get lucky with investments, I began. He built his fortune with a specific purpose. Every dollar was earned with the intention of taking care of me, of making up for the 30 years he couldn't provide for his family. I handed them David's letter. He wrote this when he first remembered us. Patricia, would you read it aloud? Patricia cleared her throat and began. To my beloved wife Margaret and my children Michael, Sarah, and Thomas. If you are reading this, it means my memory has returned and I have found you again. I cannot imagine the pain you have endured believing I was dead. I cannot imagine how Margaret has managed to raise our children alone, or what sacrifices she has made. I have spent every day since my memory began returning thinking about how to make amends for the years I was absent. Every investment decision, every business choice, every dollar saved has been with one goal, to ensure that Margaret never has to worry about money again, and that our children understand the value of family above all else. But I am not naive. I know that money can corrupt, that wealth can change people's hearts. So I have built protections into my estate, not to punish, but to ensure that love and loyalty are rewarded, while selfishness and greed are not. If my children have grown into people who value money more than family, who would abandon their mother in her time of need, then they have already received their inheritance, the education, opportunities, and foundation I provided through Margaret's sacrifices. They need nothing more from me. But if they have remained the loving, loyal children we raised, then everything I have built belongs to all of us, to be shared as a family should share, with generosity, gratitude, and love. The choice of which path to take will not be mine. It will be Margaret's, because she is the one who earned the right to decide, through 30 years of sacrifice, love, and unwavering devotion to our family. Whatever she chooses, I will support completely. She has earned that trust 1,000 times over. With all my love, David. The room was silent except for the sound of my children crying. Even Emma had stopped coloring, sensing the gravity of the moment. Your father knew, I said quietly. Somehow, even with his damaged memory, he knew that wealth might change you. He knew that you might choose money over family. So he gave me the power to decide your fate. Mom, Michael whispered, we're so sorry. We know we failed you, failed him, failed everything you taught us. Sorry isn't enough, I said. Sorry doesn't give me back 30 years of struggle. Sorry doesn't give your father back 5 years of separation. Sorry doesn't erase the cruelty you showed me when I needed you most. Sarah was sobbing openly now. We know we don't deserve forgiveness. But please, for Emma's sake. Stop, I said firmly. Don't use that child as a shield for your guilt. Don't make her the reason for your redemption. If you want forgiveness, you need to earn it for yourselves. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd spent so many years cleaning offices and serving coffee, invisible to the world. I've made my decision, I said, turning back to face them. But before I sign either document, you're going to hear exactly what your choices cost. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Patricia, I want this on record. I want them to hear their own words, their own choices, played back to them. I played the recording of my conversation with Michael about my heart problems, his dismissal of my health concerns, his claim that he was leveraged and couldn't help with basic medical expenses. I played Sarah's voice calling me dramatic, suggesting I look into government programs instead of asking my successful daughter for help. I played Tommy's devastating words about me being a complication, about how people in his position are judged by their associations. These are your voices, I said as the recordings ended. These are your choices. Not misunderstandings, not miscommunications, deliberate, calculated cruelty toward the woman who gave you everything. My children sat in stunned silence, hearing their own heartlessness played back to them. But that's not the worst part, I continued. The worst part is that while you were abandoning me, While you were telling me to be more independent and resourceful, you knew your father was alive. You knew he was looking for me. You knew that I could have been happy, secure, loved, and you chose to keep us apart to protect your own comfort. We thought, Tommy started. You thought about yourselves, I cut him off. You thought about your reputations, your careers, your freedom from responsibility. You never once thought about what I needed or deserved. I walked back to Emma's bedside and took her small hand in mine. But this little girl, I said, looking down at my granddaughter, she's taught me something important. She's taught me that love isn't about what people deserve, it's about what they need. I turned to Patricia. I've made my choice. The room held its breath. I choose forgiveness, I said. My children's faces flooded with relief, but I held up my hand. But not the way you think. I took the full inheritance document from Patricia's hands. I'm taking the entire $150 million, I said, signing my name with firm strokes. You will receive nothing from your father's estate. The relief on my children's faces turned to confusion, then despair. However, I continued, I am choosing to forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because Emma deserves to have a family that isn't destroyed by bitterness and revenge. I pulled out my checkbook, something I'd never imagined I'd have reason to use. Emma's medical treatment will cost approximately $2 million. I'm writing a check for $5 million, enough to cover her treatment, her future education, and a trust fund that will ensure she never wants for anything. I wrote the check and handed it to Tommy, whose hands were shaking as he took it. But this money comes with conditions, I said. Non-negotiable conditions. I pulled out another document Patricia had prepared. First, you will all enter family therapy. Not just individual counseling, family therapy, where you will work to understand the damage you've done and learn how to be better people. Second, you will each perform 500 hours of community service working with elderly people who have been abandoned by their families. You will see firsthand what your abandonment of me really meant. Third, you will write letters of apology, not to me, but to yourselves. Letters acknowledging your failures, your cruelty, your selfishness. These letters will be kept in Emma's trust file so that when she's old enough to understand, she'll know the truth about who you were and who you chose to become. Fourth, any future relationship between us will be earned, not assumed. You are no longer my children by default. You are people who share my DNA who must prove they deserve a place in my life. I looked at each of them in turn. And finally, you will never, ever use Emma as leverage for your own redemption. She is not responsible for your mistakes, and she is not your path to forgiveness. If you want a relationship with me, you'll earn it through your own actions, not through her innocence. Michael was the first to speak. Mom, we accept. All of it. Whatever it takes. We'll do anything, Sarah added. We'll spend the rest of our lives making this right. We'll be better, Tommy whispered. For Emma, for you, for ourselves. I looked down at Emma, who had been listening with the serious attention that sick children develop too early. Grandma, she said, does this mean you're going to stay? Does this mean I get to have a real family? I felt tears streaming down my face as I leaned down to kiss her forehead. Yes, sweetheart. You get to have a real family. But it's going to take some work to build it. David wheeled his chair closer to the bed. Emma, would you like to meet your grandfather? Her face lit up with joy. I have a grandfather too? You have a grandfather who loves you very much, David said, and who's going to make sure you get better so we can have many adventures together. As I watched my husband meet his granddaughter for the first time, as I saw my children's faces filled with genuine remorse and determination to change, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 30 years. Hope. Not the naive hope I'd carried as a young mother, believing that love was always enough. But mature hope, hope tempered by wisdom, protected by boundaries, and strengthened by the knowledge that I would never again allow myself to be powerless. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out a final document. I'm establishing the Margaret Bronston Foundation for Abandoned Elderly. $50 million will be dedicated to helping seniors who have been discarded by their families, providing them with medical care, housing, and legal support. I looked at my children. Your abandonment of me wasn't just personal, it was part of a larger problem. Elderly people all over the country are being thrown away by children who see them as burdens instead of blessings. That ends now. Patricia smiled as she witnessed the document. Mrs. Bronston, this foundation will help thousands of people. Good, I said. Because no one should have to go through what I went through. No one should have to choose between their dignity and their survival. As the legal documents were finalized, as my children signed their agreements to the conditions I'd set, I felt the weight of 30 years of powerlessness lifting from my shoulders. I was no longer the abandoned mother begging for scraps of affection from ungrateful children. I was Margaret Bronston, survivor, philanthropist, grandmother, and the woman who had turned the greatest betrayal of her life into the foundation for something better. The war was over. And everyone had won even if they didn't realize it yet. But the most important victory wasn't the money or the power or even the justice. The most important victory was Emma's smile as she looked around the room at her family, broken, flawed, but finally honest about who they were and committed to becoming better. Grandma, she said, will you teach me how to sew? Daddy says you used to make beautiful things. I squeezed her hand gently. I'll teach you everything I know, sweetheart. We have all the time in the world. And for the first time in 30 years, that was actually true. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Margaret Bronston Foundation headquarters, watching elderly clients meet with our social workers and legal advocates. The building had once housed the investment firm where I'd cleaned offices at night. Now it was a beacon of hope for seniors who'd been abandoned by their families. Emma's treatment was going beautifully. The experimental therapy had put her leukemia into remission, and she was back in school, thriving. She visited David and me every weekend at our new home, a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing ostentatious, but filled with the warmth that had been missing from my life for so long. Grandma Margaret, called Mrs. Rodriguez, one of our foundation clients. She was 83, had been living in her car after her son kicked her out for being too expensive to care for. Now she had her own apartment and was taking art classes at the community center we'd funded. How are you feeling today, Maria? I asked, giving her a gentle hug. Like I matter again, she said, tears in her eyes. Like I'm not just a burden waiting to die. That was why we did this work. Not for revenge against my children, but to ensure that no elderly person would ever again feel the worthlessness I'd experienced. My children were keeping their promises, slowly and sometimes painfully. Michael had completed his community service at a nursing home and was now volunteering there regularly. He'd taken a job at a smaller firm for half his previous salary, but he seemed genuinely happier, more grounded. Mom, he'd said during our last family therapy session, I spent so many years chasing money and status that I forgot what actually mattered. Working with the elderly residents has taught me more about success than any business deal ever did. Sarah had started a nonprofit marketing agency, using her skills to help charitable organizations. She'd also begun visiting me weekly, not asking for anything, just trying to rebuild our relationship one conversation at a time. I deleted your comments on my social media because I was ashamed, she'd admitted during one of our talks. Not ashamed of you, but ashamed of myself for having a mother who worked so hard while I lived in luxury. I should have been proud of your strength, not embarrassed by your circumstances. Tommy had perhaps changed the most dramatically. He'd sold his remaining assets and moved into a modest apartment near the hospital so Emma could continue her treatment without disruption. He'd started a small tech consulting business that focused on helping nonprofits improve their operations. I realized that building something meaningful is more satisfying than building something profitable. He'd told me. Emma's illness taught me that time is the only currency that really matters. The family therapy sessions were difficult but necessary. Dr. Williams, our counselor, had helped us navigate the complex emotions around forgiveness, accountability, and rebuilding trust. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, she'd explained during one particularly intense session. It's about choosing to move forward without being controlled by past pain. But it requires genuine change from the people who caused that pain. My children were changing, slowly but authentically. They'd written their letters of accountability, painful, honest documents that would be preserved for Emma to read when she was older. They'd completed their community service and continued volunteering. Most importantly, they'd stopped trying to justify their past behavior and started focusing on their future actions. David's recovery had been remarkable. The doctors said his determination to make up for lost time was accelerating his healing. He'd become the Foundation's unofficial grandfather figure, spending hours talking with elderly clients who reminded him of his own journey back to family. "You know what I've learned," he said one evening as we sat on our porch, watching Emma play in the garden. "The accident that took my memory wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy would have been if I'd never found my way back to love." The Foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. We'd helped over 500 elderly people in our first 6 months, providing everything from legal advocacy to housing assistance to medical care. The media attention had been overwhelmingly positive. The story of the abandoned mother who turned her pain into purpose had resonated with people across the country. But the most meaningful moment came during Emma's 7th birthday party. We'd gathered in our backyard, David and me, my 3 children, Emma, and several of our Foundation clients who'd become like extended family. As Emma blew out her candles, she made a wish and then looked around the table with serious eyes. "I wish that everyone could have a family like this," she announced. "Not perfect, but real. Where people say sorry when they mess up and try to do better." Michael reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Mom, I know I can never undo the pain I caused you. But I want you to know that watching you build this foundation, seeing how you turned your suffering into service, it's taught me what real strength looks like." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "You could have destroyed us with your power, but instead you chose to heal us. That's the kind of person I want to become." Tommy was holding Emma on his lap, and his voice was thick with emotion. "You saved my daughter's life, but more than that, you saved our family's soul. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift." I looked around the table at these people who'd hurt me so deeply and were now working so hard to heal the wounds they'd caused. It wasn't perfect. Trust takes time to rebuild, and there were still moments of tension and pain. But it was real, and it was growing stronger every day. "You know," I said, "a year ago I thought my story was ending. I thought I was just a forgotten old woman waiting to die alone. But it turns out my story was just beginning." David raised his glass of lemonade. "To new beginnings," he said. "To second chances," Michael added. "To family," Sarah said. "To love that's stronger than mistakes," Tommy contributed. "To grandmas who saved the day," Emma shouted, making everyone laugh. As the sun set over our garden, I felt a peace I'd never experienced before. Not the naive contentment of my youth, but the deep satisfaction that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing healing over hatred. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Mrs. Bronston, we just received a call from a woman in Phoenix whose children abandoned her after she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Can the Foundation help?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. We'll have someone on a plane tomorrow." This was my life now, using my resources and experience to ensure that no elderly person would suffer the abandonment I'd endured. Every person we helped was a victory against the cruelty that had nearly destroyed me. "Grandma," Emma said, climbing into my lap as the adults continued talking, "will you tell me the story again? About how you and Grandpa found each other. Which part do you want to hear? I asked, stroking her hair. The part where you decided to forgive Daddy and Uncle Michael and Aunt Sarah. The part where you chose love instead of being angry. I looked at my granddaughter, this beautiful child who'd been the catalyst for our family's healing, and realized that she understood something profound about the choice I'd made. Well, I began. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to punish people who hurt you. Sometimes the strongest thing is to give them a chance to become better than they were. Like a superhero? Emma asked. Exactly like a superhero, I said. But instead of fighting bad guys, you fight the bad feelings that make people do mean things. As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, I found myself alone with David on the porch, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Any regrets? He asked, taking my hand. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret the 30 years of struggle? The heartbreak of believing he was dead? The pain of my children's abandonment? No, I said finally. Because all of that pain led to this moment. It led to Emma, to the foundation, to understanding what real strength looks like. If I hadn't suffered, I wouldn't have known how to help others who are suffering. And our children? They're learning, I said. They're becoming the people we always hoped they could be. It just took them longer to get there than we expected. David squeezed my hand. I love you, Margaret Bronston. I loved you when we were young and poor. I loved you through 30 years of amnesia, and I love you now as we build this new life together. I love you too, I said. And I love the family we're creating, not the perfect family we dreamed of, but the real family we're choosing to become. As we sat in comfortable silence, I thought about all the people watching this story, all the viewers who might be struggling with their own family betrayals, their own feelings of powerlessness, their own questions about forgiveness and justice. I wanted them to know that healing is possible, that strength can emerge from suffering, that love, real love, is always a choice, not just a feeling. I wanted them to know that no matter how powerless they feel today, they have the ability to write a different ending to their story. And I wanted them to know that sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemies, it's helping them become better people. Hey everyone, I said, looking directly into an imaginary camera, speaking to all the people who might need to hear this message. If you're watching this and you're struggling with family betrayal, with feeling forgotten or abandoned, I want you to know something important. Your story isn't over. You have more power than you realize, and you deserve better than you've been given. Don't let other people's failures define your worth. Don't let their cruelty make you cruel. Choose healing over hatred. Choose growth over revenge. Choose love over fear. And remember, the people who throw you away might someday realize they've discarded the most valuable thing in their lives. When that day comes, you get to choose what happens next. Choose wisely. Choose with strength. Choose with love. And if you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Because we're all in this together, and everyone deserves a chance at a happy ending. As David and I headed inside to check on Emma one last time before bed, I felt grateful for every twist and turn that had brought us to this moment. The abandoned mother was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and used her power to lift others up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to help, new opportunities to choose love over bitterness. But tonight, I was simply Margaret Bronston, wife, mother, grandmother, and survivor, surrounded by the family I'd fought to save and the love I'd never stopped believing in. And that was more than enough. That was everything. Thank you for joining me on this journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimate triumph. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Remember, your story isn't over, and you have the power to write a beautiful ending. Until next time, choose love, choose strength, and never forget your worth.